A Heroine's Beginning. Chapter 1. My first day of my new life was certainly an interesting one, and it was cold. The ground was wet with dew, which seeped into my thin boot and made my feet icy cold. But I was determined to ignore it. It was the first day of my adult life, and nothing was going to spoil it. The birds were singing their early morning song as the rays of sun peeped over the tops of the hedges lining the path. The gray stone of the house came into view, and it almost seemed like it was shining in the morning light. I stopped and stared at the sheer enormity of the house, with 4 floors and walled gardens. To many other people, the manor would not seem that large. But to me, after living in a cottage with a single floor and only 3 bedrooms, this house could have been a palace, and I wouldn't have known any different. The first twinge of fear crept into my mind. I had no idea how I was going to find my way around the house. It would take me at least a month to find my way from the attic to the kitchens. I stood frozen for a moment in front of the manor, wanting to go back home, spend the rest of my life content to tell my siblings stories of adventures and romances. But in my heart, I knew that they needed me here more than they needed me at home. I must do my part to help them, and there was no escaping that fact. So I slowly turned and put one foot in front of the other and headed a step at a time toward the back of the house. As I rounded the corner, a small porch came into sight, with a weather-beaten staircase leading up to it. The steps were rather uneven in places, and I told myself to take note, for if I was carrying anything up and down these stairs, I did not want to trip. I ascended the stairs rapidly, and lifted my fist to rap lightly on the door. The door flew open after a minute of waiting, and I was surprised to see a young, bright face staring at me. Her blonde curls fell around her face, framing it prettily. She smiled at me, and turned her head curiously to one side. "Do I know you?" she inquired. "I don't think so," I replied nervously. "I could have sworn I've seen you before. Are you from the village?" "Yes, I'm Marion Brown. My father is—" "Mr. Brown. Yes, I do know where I've seen you before. You were at the May Day dance. You were playing with some other children by the river. Are they your friends?" "My brothers and sisters," I responded. I wasn't aware that our play was of any interest to anyone else. "Really? All of them? How many do you have?" She seemed genuinely shocked. 7, I replied quickly. "Gosh, I should have liked to have had a brother or sister to play with, but there's only me." "Miss Ella!" A loud voice came from down the hall. The blonde girl whipped her head around to see who was approaching and smiled. "Miss Pole, I only answered the door. No one else was around," she said sweetly. "And that was kind of you, but you know you shouldn't be answering the back door. It's not your place." An older woman came into sight, with a kind face, and her gray hair tied back into a bun, with stray bits spilling out a little. "I know," the girl who seemed to be called Ella replied. "But she was waiting out in the cold," she explained, gesturing to me. The woman glanced around the edge of the door to see me stood there. I could feel the cold now. The wind was bracing and making my hair whirl around my face painfully. "Ah, you must be the new girl. Hannah's daughter?" she asked. I nodded and dipped a small curtsy. "Marion, ma'am." The woman let out a small chuckle. "I don't know why you're curtsying to me, dear. The lady of the house is here." Her head inclined towards Ella. It then hit me that this blonde-haired girl must be Sir Henry's daughter. I had only ever seen her from a distance, so I had not recognized her when she had opened the door. My cheeks started to burn, and my eyes stared at the ground as I fell into the largest curtsy I could manage with my bag in my hand. Unfortunately, My bag hit the ground with such force that it burst open, and my dresses practically flew out. They almost seemed alive in the wind, dancing and flying around the courtyard, before sadly landing, 2 of them in a rather large muddy puddle, and the other on the cobblestones. I ran towards the puddle as fast as my legs would allow, but to my dismay, the water had already begun to seep into the fabric, which was turning them a rather horrid shade of brown. To my surprise, I saw Miss Ella crouch next to me, also trying to remove the other dress from the muddy water. I averted my eyes and tried to take my ruined dress from her, too embarrassed that the lady should help me with my mistake. She resisted when I tried to grab the dress from her. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm ever so sorry, miss. So sorry. May I have my dress back?" I replied in a quiet voice. "It is fine. I'll carry it in. Your hands are full anyway." My head snapped around to look at her incredulously. Why would a high-born lady offer to help me with my laundry? "But, miss, your dress is getting dirty." The filthy water was indeed bleeding into her pale blue dress. "I can manage." "Truly, I don't mind," she responded. And without waiting for me to protest, she set back toward the house. I hurried after her through the door, my head down, following her down the corridor that led through the kitchens. Ella deposited my dress on the back of a chair by the fire. The woman who had come to the door gave her a disapproving look, and tutted quietly to herself as she handed her a clean, wet cloth to tidy herself up with. Ella giggled and dipped her finger into the porridge pot that was cooking on the stove, then quickly put her finger in her mouth. The woman laughed as she scolded her, and told her to wait until breakfast. With that, Ella gave me one more smile and said, "Good luck," as she ran off upstairs. I decided in that moment that I really liked Miss Ella. I wouldn't mind serving her. "Right, Marion." My entire body turned when I heard my name. The woman was staring at my dirty dresses. "These need to be dealt with before they become ruined forever." She lifted all of the wet clothes and dropped them into a wooden tub filled with soapy water. She thrust a scrubbing brush into my hands and said, "I trust you know what to do with this." I nodded quickly. "My name is Mrs. Pohl, housekeeper. Any questions? Just shout, all right?" I nodded again. "Talkative little thing, aren't you?" she chuckled. I was surprised at this. At home, I was always the chatty one. I would always be telling some story or instructing them or even just singing to myself to pass the time. I hadn't realized that my nervousness of today had made me practically mute. So instead of protesting against her comment, I simply nodded again, and she walked away, laughing to herself. I looked at the worn-down brush in my hand. It was much newer than the one we owned at home, and had many more bristles. Maybe scrubbing clothes was not going to be such an arduous task here. In fact, just glancing around the kitchen, everything here looked in much better condition than what we owned. But I suppose that's to be expected, coming from a wealthy family. My nervousness eased a little. This job did not seem to be as bad as I had come to imagine it to be. So with that resolved, I bent my head to the tub and began to scrub.